Good day everyone, I am Ivy Lapid. I am going to continue with our presentation. Now let us go on to the female reproductive system. My topic will include the following: the functions of the female reproductive system, the parts and its functions, how the female reproductive system works, common diseases or disorders, and lastly, the trivia and facts. The organs, structures, and function of the female reproductive system give women the ability to produce a baby. So here are the following functions of the reproductive system. Number 1. Producing gametes called eggs or ovum, which is the biggest cell in the human body, especially in women. Number 2. Secreting sex hormones such as estrogen. These hormones help develop and maintain both the reproductive system and female characteristics such as breast and pubic hair. Number 3. Providing a site for fertilization. Number 4. Gestating a fetus if fertilization occurs. And number 5. Giving birth to a baby. And lastly, breastfeeding a baby after birth. Mammary gland is said to be part of reproductive system because it is also a vital accessory organ of the female reproductive system. Next is the external parts of the female reproductive system. The female genitals or vulva includes the parts of the female sexual organs that are on the outside of the body. It contains anus, perineum, vaginal opening, labia minora, urethral opening, labia majora, clitoris, mons pubis, and the vestibule. Anus is the opening at the end of the digestive tract where bowel contents leave the body. A triangular-shaped hollow organ located in the lower abdomen. It is held in place by ligaments that are attached to the other organs at the pelvic bones. Next is the perineum, which is the area between the genitals and the anus. It supports the pelvic floor, the bottom of the pelvic cavity that holds your intestines, bladder, and other internal organs. Muscles and nerves that run through this small area control the sexual function and the urinary and excretory systems. The vaginal opening is the entrance to the vagina. Next is the labia minora, or the small lips, and can have a variety of sizes and shapes. This is the outer layer of the skin folds which are covered with pubic hair after puberty. It surrounds the openings to the vagina and urethra. This skin is very delicate and can become easily irritated and swollen. The urethral opening is the end of the tube which carries urine from the bladder to the outside or urethra. So, amo ni sa ang ginagwaan sang aton nga ihi. Next is the labia majora. So, kung ang labia minora ginatawag nga small lips, ang labia majora naman ay ang large lips. It enclose and protect the other external reproductive organs. During the puberty, hair growth occurs on the skin of the labia majora, which contains sweat and oil-secreting glands. The clitoris is where the two labia minora meet. It is a lump tissue at the top of the labia, a small and sensitive protrusion that is comparable to the penis in male. Like the penis, the clitoris is very sensitive to stimulation and can become erect. It has a single purpose which enables you to experience sexual pleasure. Vestibule or Bartholin's glands. This is a smooth surface that begins superiorly just below the clitoris and ends inferiorly at the posterior commissure of the labia minora. The vulva vestibule contains the opening to the urethra and the vaginal opening. These produce a sticky substance to moisten the vagina for sexual intercourse. Mons pubis. This mound of tissue is prominent in females and is usually covered in pubic hair. Its functions is a source of cushioning during sexual intercourse. It also contains sebaceous glands that secrete pheromones to induce sexual attraction. And now let us go on to the internal parts of the female reproductive system, which includes the following: vagina, cervix, myometrium, endometrium, uterine tube, fundus, uterus, fallopian tube, fimbriae, and ovary. The vagina is a muscular canal lined with nerves and mucous membranes. It connects the uterus and cervix to the outside of the body, allowing for menstruation, intercourse, and childbirth. It also receives the penis during sexual intercourse. Cervix is the door to the female reproductive system. Anatomically, it must allow sperm passage into the uterus through the endocervical canal, and it must produce mucus to facilitate sperm entry. Myometrium, or the middle layer of tissue, which is muscular and comprises the greater part of the bulk of the organ. Myometrium hosts the structural integrity for the uterus and generate force for parturition with its primary component, the smooth muscle cells. While the endometrium is the inner lining of the uterus, its main functions are to undergo cyclic changes of the menstrual cycle and to provide a site for implantation of the blastocyst and development of placenta. The placenta is an organ that develops in the uterus during pregnancy. It provides oxygen and nutrients to a growing baby, and it also removes waste products from the baby's blood. Uterine tube or fallopian tube. These are narrow tubes that are attached to the upper part of the uterus and serve as pathways for the ova or egg cells to travel from the ovaries to the uterus. Fertilization of an egg by a sperm normally occurs in the fallopian tubes. Next is the fundus. It is the upper end of the uterus and it joins the fallopian tubes at the either side, while the lower end will open into the vagina. It is also superiormost region that will host a fertilized embryo as it grows into a baby. The uterus is an inverted pear-shaped muscular organ of the female reproductive system located between the bladder and the rectum. It functions to nourish and house the fertilized egg until the unborn child is ready to be delivered. The fimbriae are linked to the ovary. These fimbriae are the fringe of tissue near the ostium of the uterine tube directing to the ovary. During the process of ovulation, when an egg releases in the peritoneal cavity from the ovary, the fimbriae cilia sweep the ova inside the fallopian tube. Lastly, the ovary. These are small oval-shaped glands that are located on either side of the uterus. It produces eggs and female sex hormones which are released into the bloodstream. And now let us go on how the female reproductive system works. Now let us go to the first activity done by the reproductive system, which is the menstrual cycle. The activity of the female reproductive system is controlled by hormones released both by brain, which is in the part of the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary, and by the ovaries. The combination of all these hormones gives women their menstrual cycle. The length of the menstrual or reproductive cycle is usually between 24 to 35 days. During this time, an egg or ovum is developed and matured. At the same time, the lining of the womb or uterus is prepared to receive a fertilized egg. If a fertilized egg is not implanted into the uterus, the lining of the uterus is shed and is expelled from the body. This is the bleeding known as having a period or menstruation. Traditionally, the first day of bleeding is known as day 1 of the menstrual cycle. The key event in the cycle is ovulation. This is the release of matured egg from one of the ovaries. This usually takes place around the 14th day of a 28-day cycle. So these are the 3 phases of the menstrual cycle. First is the follicular phase or the development of the egg. Next is the ovulatory phase or the release of the egg. And lastly, the luteal phase or hormone levels decrease if the egg does not implant. The follicular phase starts on the first day of menstruation and ends with ovulation. Prompted by the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland releases follicles stimulating hormones or FSH. These hormones stimulate the ovary to produce around 5 to 20 follicles which bead on the surface. Next is the ovulatory phase. Ovulation is the time when an egg is released from the dominant follicle or the winner of the race, within an ovary into the fallopian tube where it can become fertilized by sperm. This is the only time during the menstrual cycle that a woman can become pregnant. Lastly, the luteal phase. It occurs after the ovulation when your ovaries release an egg and before your period starts. During this time, the lining of your uterus normally gets thicker to prepare for a possible pregnancy. And if the egg is not fertilized, it passes through the uterus. Not needed to support a pregnancy, the lining of the uterus breaks down and sheds, and the next menstrual period begins. So next is the menopausal period. During menopause, the female reproductive system gradually stops making the female hormones necessary for the reproductive cycle to work. At this point, menstrual cycles can become irregular and eventually stops. 1 year after menstrual cycle stop, the woman is considered to be menopausal. Next is the human fertilization. Fertilization is defined as the fusion between the male and female gametes, that is, sperm and egg, thereby re-establishing the normal number of chromosomes in humans, which is 46 chromosomes. For a human fertilization to be possible, it is necessary that a man ejaculates inside the vagina of a woman. From that moment on, spermatozoa will start their journey inside the female reproductive tract until they reach the fallopian tubes where the egg cell is located. So here is the step of the human's fertilization, which includes sperm capacitation, sperm zona pellucida binding, a chromosome reaction, penetration of the zona pellucida of the egg sperm binding, egg cell activation and cortical reaction, fusion of pronuclei, and lastly the creation of human zygote. So first is the sperm capacitation, is a biochemical process occurring in the female reproductive tract which enables sperm to fertilize an ovum. It destabilizes the chromosome membrane so that it can penetrate the egg and increases the motility of sperm by certain chemical changes in the tail. Second is the sperm zona pellucida binding. When the sperm cell attaches to the zona pellucida, it will be triggered to undergo the chromosome reaction which allow the hyperactivated motile sperm cell to drill through the zona pellucida or secondary zona pellucida binding coinciding with sequential local zona pellucida digestion and rebinding. Third is the acrosome reaction, is the exocytosis of the acrosome or the fusion of the acrosomal membrane with the sperm's plasma membrane. This process releases the acrosomal contents to the outside of the sperm and exposes the inner acrosomal membrane's proteins on the sperm's outer plasma membrane. Fourth is the penetration of the zona pellucida of the egg. For fertilization to occur, a spermatozoon needs to cross the zona pellucida or ZP, which is a glycoprotein layer surrounding the oocyte. Crossing the ZP requires an chromosome reaction or AR, where enzymes released from the spermatozoon head locally digest and soften the ZP so that the spermatozoon can penetrate deeper. Fifth is egg-sperm binding. As the sperm approach the egg, they bind to the zona pellucida in a process known as sperm binding. This triggers the acrosome reaction in which the enzymes of the acrosome are freed. These enzymes then begin to digest the zona pellucida and allow the sperm to tunnel down toward the egg's plasma membrane. Sixth is the egg cell activation and cortical reaction. The interaction between the sperm and egg plasma membranes leads to egg activation, which is essential for further development. Egg activation includes early events such as Ca2 plus rise, cortical reaction or CR, resumption of the cell cycle, and later events such as pronuclear formation and DNA synthesis. Seventh is the fusion of the pronuclei. The male and the female pronuclei don't fuse, although their genetic material does. Instead, their membranes dissolve, leaving no barriers between the male and female chromosomes. Their chromosomes can then combine and become part of a single diploid nucleus in the resulting embryo, containing a full set of chromosomes. And lastly, the creation of the human zygote. A zygote forms when a sperm penetrates the outer surface of an egg. This happens in the fallopian tube. While the zygote stage is very brief, lasting only the early days of conception, it is important. The single-celled zygote contains all the genetic information required to form a fetus. Here in the screen can be seen the common diseases and disorders. But I will specify 3 common diseases, which are cervical cancer, vaginitis, and endometriosis. Cervical cancer, or cancer of the cervix of the uterus, usually caused by infection with human papillomavirus or HPV, occurs when cells of the cervix or neck of the uterus grow abnormally and develop the ability to invade nearby tissues or spread to other parts of the body such as the abdomen or lungs. Next is the vaginitis. Inflammation of the vagina, usually caused by an infection with microbes, is inflammation of the vagina and sometimes the vulva as well. Symptoms may include a discharge that is yellow, gray or green, itching, pain, and a burning sensation. There may also be a foul vaginal odor and pain or irritation with sexual intercourse. And lastly, the endometriosis disease, in which endometrial tissue grows outside the uterus. Typically causing pain and bleeding, is a disease in which endometrial tissue, which normally grows inside the uterus, grows outside of the uterus. Most often, the endometrial tissue grows around the ovaries, fallopian tubes, and uterus. Now let us go on to the facts about the female reproductive system. A woman can have 6 to 7 million egg cells during fetal life. A female can give birth to about 35 babies in a lifetime. The lifespan of an ova is 12 to 24 hours after it is released from the ovary, while a sperm can live up to 36 hours. Alcohol, smoking, and drug abuse can have a negative impact on an individual's sexual performance, while exercise and healthy diet can improve it. Fertilization is highly possible when the female is at the middle of her menstrual cycle. This is when the hormones promoting pregnancy are at their peak. A female uterus is normally about 3 inches long and 2 inches wide, which can expand up to 20 times during pregnancy. Uterus contains one of the strongest muscles of the female body. Fallopian tubes are about 12 cm long and wide as a sewing needle. At the 8th week of pregnancy, vital organs like brain, heart, skin, and stomach are all developed, with the embryo measuring only an adult's thumb. Health of the fetus and its development is affected by the mother's oral health. When in womb, the body of the baby is covered by a thin layer of hair that disappears when the baby is born. So that ends about my presentation about the female reproductive system. Next is the debunking myths to be reported by Mr. Banyadera.